Another, aka the final edition of Beat the Closing Number, at least college basketball-wise, presented by TheLines.com, breaking down March Madness National Championship game between Florida and Houston. We'll also talk about some Final Four takeaways from the get-go on the show, quick takeaways from both Final Four matchups, and a look ahead to next year's national title odds. So, Matt, how we doing? Before we get into what our betting thoughts were from last night as we record here on Sunday, April 6th, a day out of the national title game, how are we feeling 24 hours, a little over 24 hours away from Florida, Houston?
I'm still not over, last night, Saturday night, it was two unbelievable basketball games. And it looked like for a while that second one wasn't going to be unbelievable, but did it deliver? And I think, I was watching it with a good friend of the show, Justin Perry in New York City. And him and I were just sitting there looking at each other after the Cooper flag over the back call that basically took Duke out of that basketball game. And we just had no words. We could not believe what was going on.
As that call shouldn't have been made, or just shock?
Just shock. Looking back on it, it was a kind of a weak call. And in the situation, I mean, if you are someone who's like, you can't call that in that situation, then you're screaming, because what a crazy situation for that to have happened in. But just, it's like the most anticlimactic way that could have ended. Duke just couldn't score for the last 10 minutes, and Houston's getting these, stealing it off the press and making them call timeouts. And for it to end on an over-the-back call that leads to the game-winning free throws is just such a crazy way for it to have ended. You couldn't, for such an unlikely ending, you couldn't have come up with a more unlikely way that it happened.
Well, it's not like John Shire didn't have a chance to call a play rather than run Cooper flag isolation. It
was the right play. I think it was the right play. Cooper flag had a size advantage. He's their best player. You take that shot every time.
Okay. Not to go back to our last show, but agree to disagree on the play call down the stretch. Granted, you go, as you said, to your best player. I thought he kind of reverted to early season calls, whether it was the Kentucky game, the Kansas game, just kind of clear out, left flag, go. I thought he had some great after timeout calls later in the season that maybe in this situation you go to your best player, but either way, we'll get into Florida, Houston, like I mentioned here in a moment. My quick takeaways from both games. Starting off with Florida, Auburn. Yes, I didn't hedge even in game on Auburn, but I could sleep at night knowing I made the projection. Pick them. I'll always typically go that route if my numbers are a little off market. I didn't hedge on my Clemson Final Four futures last year, like I touched on the podcast earlier in the week with you. Wasn't planning on hedging on Auburn. I didn't hedge in game even with Auburn up at halftime. And credit to Florida and their second half adjustments. Auburn couldn't get anything going in the half court in the final 20 minutes. Janai Broome with his final made shot with, I think, just over 15 minutes left in the game. Pretty wild, considering how well he played in the first half. But the better game of the two, maybe the one shining moment that we were waiting for in this tournament. We'll see if we get another one in the national championship. But I kind of like this take, and I was thinking about it. I was spewing, how am I going to frame this Houston Duke game on the podcast? I thought JoJo Tugler, this was my biggest take after the game. And obviously, if I had Duke, maybe I would have a different opinion after the fact. But I thought JoJo Tugler was the epitome of how a gambler should act and how he responded after the Class B technical foul. Because we could talk all we want about, as you mentioned, Houston's denial on the inbounds, forcing a turnover, which, by the way, had a lot to do with JoJo Tugler. But coming back from that, down 6 after, I think it was Knipple makes the free throw. Yeah. I thought that was going to decide, not only obviously the outcome, but the spread. Because then Duke goes up 6 with the ball. They were going to get the ball, but you get an extra point. He blocks a Knipple drive that leads to Emmanuel Sharp's 3. Like I mentioned, helps force the turnover on the inbounds. Has the putback dunk on the Malik Wilson, honestly a dumb 3-point shot when you had all the time in the world to take it. Okay, another agree to disagree there. It was a clean look. I'll give him that. It was an open shot. I thought he didn't play well all game, frankly. But to your point, maybe it was an open look. And then he traps Knipple on the ensuing inbounds play. It leads to Proctor getting the ball. And then you have the front end miss. Cooper Flag, questionable over the back call. But either way, it's not Knipple taking the free throw on the 1-and-1. It's Tyrese Proctor, a 60-ish% free throw shooter in the tournament. Houston wins the game. JoJo Tugler, not only to me, won the game for Houston down the stretch, but he overcame a lot. And I also credit Calvin Sampson for not going at him, because we both know Calvin Sampson is not afraid of going at one of his guys, but he probably held back a bit, knowing that, okay, the game is still in the balance. I'm not taking Tugler out of the game. Maybe I shy away from screaming at one of my most impactful defensive players down the stretch with the game still in reach, even though I thought, and I'm going to throw you into the loop here, we both probably thought the game was out of reach after Knipple hits the free throw, Duke up 6 with the ball.
I mean, I thought the game was out of reach when Duke was up 14 with 4.5 minutes left, if we're being real. The word that I think sums that all up for Houston is poise. There are probably tens of thousands of people in the arena that were more nervous and on edge about what was going on in the final minute of that game than Houston was. They did not foul. I mean, they had that one foul unnecessarily with about a minute and a half left, which led to free throws, which is, I think, got to an 8-point spread, which is where I thought the game was over. But ever since that moment and that little Tugler reach, everything they did was composed and under control. I like the Malik Wilson shot because if you bring that out and run a set, now Duke has a set defense. And with the way that Houston offensive rebounds, and they got an offensive rebound on that play, if you throw it up right away on a scramble situation off a steal, if it doesn't go in, you're probably getting that offensive rebound, or at least you're continuing that scramble, which all you want in the last minute when you're down is to make the opponent uncomfortable. It's exactly how Duke came back against Kansas. Just, it's not about steals and it's not about scores. It's about just make the opponent uncomfortable and they'll make the mistakes for you. And Duke, for the most part, did make the mistakes for Houston. It wasn't like Houston played unbelievable defense on that pressure. Like, they did a great job of forcing and denying and being physical, but a lot of those errors were on Duke, and that's Houston's poise.
Yeah, no, well said there. And going back to our conversation leading up to the game on Thursday's episode, we both said it in different ways. To me, this was, and you argued, Clemson was out-physicaled, was not the tougher team in their loss to McNeese State. Going back to that conversation, I also was thinking about it over the weekend. Clemson did not have Dylan Hunter in that game, but I digress.
Backup guard.
Their best defensive guard. Anyways, Houston.
Defense wasn't the issue.
Houston was plus 11 on the glass. They controlled and probably out-toughened Duke and wore Duke down. That
Yes.
was also kind of full circle for me. Yes, Duke collapsed, melted in the final 2+ minutes, and frankly, 8 minutes onward. But Duke didn't have a defensive rebound after Cooper Flag had a defensive rebound with 3:23 left in the game. And again, plus 11 on the glass. It came down to rebounding. It came down to JoJo Tugler. It came down to wearing Duke down, where maybe they were mentally fatigued.
Just quickly, what I would describe this, and I was saying it throughout the entire game, especially when Kaman Malawach was in the game for Duke, and obviously there's been lots of narrative about how much he really did struggle in his 20 minutes of action with no rebounds, especially in those minutes, but really the entire game. A 50-50 ball was an 80-20 ball. And inevitably, I think that was the biggest difference in this game, where Duke was the more skilled and better team for 38.5 minutes of it, if we're kind of doing the whole summary here. It was that 50-50 balls were 80-20 balls, and Houston got more possessions because of that.
Which is generally what games boil down to.
Yep.
So as we blend now that handicap, or our takeaways from Duke and Houston, into our initial thoughts, bets for the national championship game, what everyone came to watch and hear on this show. Florida about a 1.5 point favorite against the Cougars. Total of 141.5. Money line is right around Gators minus 115, Houston minus 105, depending on the book. I think MGM is hanging a minus 118, minus 102. The 102 being in Houston's direction. So, initial takes here. Still have to do my write-up. Haven't placed a bet yet. But I have 3 thoughts that lead me to betting on Houston, or likely betting on Houston in this game. A, I trust Calvin Sampson more on a quick turnaround than Todd Golden. We saw that with Florida against UConn, Danny Hurley, yes, and Florida against Texas Tech, Grant McCaslin. Florida should have lost both of those games. In my mind, they came away. You could argue they came away mentally stronger for both of those outcomes, but I still trust Houston's coaching staff on a 1+ day turnaround in this one for a reason that I'll bring up kind of sandwiched in between this next thought. Speaking of offensive rebounds, Florida allowing 11.6 offensive boards per game in the tournament and giving up, by the way, a 67.2% clip at the rim and a 44% clip in the paint. So not only does that correlate to if Houston generates second chance opportunities, which they're the second or 10th best offensive rebounding team nationally across college basketball. So you get second chance shots. You have likely attempts at the rim as a result, but you can also probably score in the paint against Florida's drop coverage, which they run about 30% of the time. And last point here before I swing it to you, Matt, with the coaching edge thing, we touched on this with Florida and Auburn and also with Houston and Duke in the handicap. Florida ranks in the 96th percentile when it comes to transition denial. So if you can keep Florida out of transition, which sides with Houston's coaching staff, and you're also great at defending in transition, 79th percentile in terms of opponents' points per possession on the break. All those factors, well, I like Houston's defense. I think they're able to control the glass, which kind of like Duke. Granted, you're going up against a more physical team in Florida, a more veteran team in Florida. I think all those points side with Houston. I'll be on the 1.5 juiced point. I'm always one to take the points. Just if I make a game Houston -1, I'm not going to bet money line. I'm going to take where my biggest edge is, which is on the point spread. So, long story short, I like Houston. How about you?
I like Houston as well, but what makes me most happy is that you didn't mention the point that I like the most, so that we can actually, we're not saying the same thing here. I
just like that we agree on something.
Yeah, we agree on this. I mean, I will say I was 2-0 against the spread in the Final Four, so this might be a good thing that we agree here. But what I will say is this. Take away the Norfolk State game and the Maryland game, which was really quite easy. The other 3 were tough games for Florida. And I think that it's a pretty universal sentiment that we could all agree Florida does not win any of those 3 games without Walter Clayton. They don't. All 3 of those games are Florida losses if Walter Clayton isn't superhuman. Houston, of all teams in the entire country, will take away your primary ball handler. They will take away your point guard. They will trap him every time there's a ball screen set. They will double him every time he goes to the rim. And I do not think that Florida can win this game against the best team in the country in terms of talent, not named Duke. Ken Palm, most analytics sites would agree. If Walter Clayton isn't superhuman again, and he will have to shoot from 30 feet away before the defense commits if he's going to score points here, because he's not going to be able to get to the rim off the dribble against a great rim denial, and he's not going to be able to score off of the pick and roll because they're going to trap him. He's going to have to get rid of the ball, and they're going to have to make everyone else beat them. And the number one example I'd give to this is Houston played, if Walter Clayton's the best point guard in the country, they played the second best point guard in the country a week ago, and Braden Smith took 7 shots. He had 15 assists, and he only took 7 shots, 2 of them inside the 3-point line, because every time Purdue set a screen, Braden Smith saw 2 to 3 defenders. And Walter Clayton is not the passer Braden Smith is. He'll get good looks for assists because once he gets it out of that trap, it's going to be 4-on-3 for Florida. But will Florida win those 4-on-3 matchups? Because Duke didn't, at least for the second half of this game. they had those Knipple reverse threes, which they're going to have for Elijah Martin and Will Richard, who will need to be awesome in this game. But you don't want Florida's bigs shooting threes if you're Florida, because that's not their strength. And you don't want Florida's bigs, Chinulu or handlogged, and controlling the ball at all, which means they can't set those screens. Because if they set those screens, they're the ones that are initiating the action. So I just think that Florida is going to have a lot of trouble scoring because they won't have Clayton to save them.
I was about 2 hours ago thinking to myself, do I want to stomach another Walter Clayton under again? Do we? Do we, Matt?
I think you have to do Clayton under points because it's going to be the number is going to be set based off of precedent, not off of matchup. And I'm always going to take matchup over precedent. I honestly might like his assists prop more over assists more than under points because now there's less of a stomaching issue, but I think both hit. I think he goes under his points and over his assists because Houston will not let Clayton be the reason they lose this game. It will be anybody else.
Vig is very high on Clayton over 19.5, so it's essentially 20, but let's say you get under 19.5 minus 105, maybe even money. I think that's a pretty good bet. So I'm with you there. You sealed it for me. I'm probably going to have a small bet. It wasn't let's say, I hate using units, but it wasn't a full unit bet for me. It was about a third of a unit on Clayton even money to go under. I'm probably going to do it again.
Yep.
Now that you kind of seal the deal for me with that analysis, I agree. They're going to trap him every chance they get. Auburn did a good job. He just continued to hit contested shot after contested shot. He also, ball screen action for Florida was really good, freeing him up for some looks off a dribble penetration, which you touched on in your handicap for Florida. Auburn, Florida being the better team, or maybe the more well-equipped team to handle Auburn's defense. Mm-hmm. Conversely, Auburn's guards struggle to get to the rim, especially in the second half. Yeah. But yeah, I'm with you on Clayton under and maybe assist over as well. Maybe, how about a parlay?
Yeah. I think if one hits, the other one does. I'm not sure how they'll adjust the EV there, but that seems like a solid idea to me.
The other prop that I know we're in lockstep on is Uzan, the Oklahoma transfer, over 12.5 points. 7 points against Duke. Foul trouble was a big part of that for me. So just intuition-wise, with the market keeping the number about the same, maybe even a point off, depending on the book that it was in the Final Four. I think that's a good look too. Any takes there?
Yeah, I'm on Uzan as well, simply because Florida's going to play almost the entire game with three guards. Martin and Richard are exceptional defenders, and I think that they draw Cryer and Sharp. They're the two best dribble penetrators on this team, and Florida is going to need to contend with that dribble penetration. I think that it's most likely that Uzan draws Clayton, and Uzan he was in foul trouble against Duke, and Cryer was the guy for the first 35 minutes, and then Sharp was the closer. And Uzan has had some outstanding games in the second half of the season. I think Florida will put Clayton on him, and then that's the best matchup that they have in terms of the guards, because the bigs, Florida is a great rim protection team, and Houston doesn't get there. So, sure, maybe Juwan Roberts will, post hook them to death, which, by the way, Juwan Roberts over 10.5, which did hit, was the most brutal bet ever because he missed 7 layups.
But he made his free throws.
He made his free throws. I mean, he didn't make all of them, but he made them when it mattered. There's a guard is going to go over for Houston because Florida is going to allow that dribble penetration to happen, and Houston, all they do is dribble penetrate. And I think Uzan has the best matchup and has the most value.
When we talk about MOP odds, not that I want to necessarily handicap them, but more so if any of our viewers or listeners are thinking, okay, I want to take a long shot here. We touched on this on Thursday's episode leading into the Final Four. The voters are entering their ballot with 10 minutes left in the game. So you're talking about 30 minutes of action from the national championship game plus Final Four results.
Right.
To me, it's even if Cryer has, let's say, 15 points and Uzan scores 25, or Sharp has 25 plus points. Depending on when that happens, maybe I'm wrong, but I still think it's Clayton or Cryer.
Yeah, I completely agree. it would be, I mean, we're talking about that Kansas situation from a couple years ago when the championship basically didn't matter. Um, with how dominant Cryer and Clayton were, even though I just said I don't think Clayton's going to score a lot of points, like, first of all, he might get an 11 point, 10 assist double double, and he'll win it with ease if Florida wins the game and they do that. It would take an unbelievable performance and, most importantly, unbelievable first half performance from anybody not named Clayton and Cryer and their team winning the game for one of those two not to win it. And I don't think there's any value in a long shot.
What other props do you like before we shift back to another major market with the total? Any other player props that you're eyeing?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that when it comes down to rebounding, it's not something I'm amazing at handicapping, but what I will say is this. Houston will probably win the glass. That's what they do. But what's more important than offensive rebounding in this game is transition denial. You touched on it earlier. And although Houston can deny transition when they crash the glass, it's a heck of a lot easier to deny it when you don't. So there's a chance that maybe Houston's a little bit less in the board crashing mode than usual. So if you look at like offensive rebounding rate, and their leading offensive rebounder by far is Tugler, maybe that signifies that Tugler's not hitting his rebounding prop. But that's just a little bit of a reach. It's where I would lean if we're saying you have to pick a rebounder. That's where I'm at.
If we look at the total around 140 and a half, 141 at this point, it got bet up very quickly to 142, and then the market has come back down. Yeah. I'm more inclined, and I don't think I'll have a play on the total one way or the other. I'm more inclined to take a first half under if I'm going to have a piece one way or the other. Two top 10 defenses goes without saying. I think we're both in lockstep again that we like Houston, so therefore Houston within our handicap likelier to control the tempo. 350th in college basketball in adjusted tempo. Florida 42nd. Now, if Florida wins the game, controls the tempo. If Houston's hitting threes, first half could go over, full game could go over. But I think this is more of a game that's set up for Houston to be effective with their physicality, whether it's on the glass, even if it's not so much with generating as many offensive rebounds as you hinted at in the last player prop handicap. So, slight lean to first half under for me, but not enough of an edge to bet it.
Yeah, it's tough because KenPom has the projected total at 65. This probably goes like in the 63 to 65 range. So it's a slight under on the projected total versus what it's at. But then also KenPom has it at 143. So the market kind of has that adjusted as well. I think that the total, like, I'm always going to lean under in a Houston game. And despite how crazy the last minute was in that game last night, it still went under by half a point on the close. But to me, it just comes down to how, like, first half under makes sense because probably Florida figures out the trapping a little bit better over time, and they might kind of get blitzed at the start, is probably where I'm thinking makes the most sense. I definitely wouldn't suggest the over, just because Florida's like, this is like, you're talking about transition in half court. Florida's good in the half court. They're 86th percentile, but they're top 7 transition offense in the country. So not getting that on a super high rate, not getting that is inevitably going to hamper their offense in some way, shape, or form. They're not going to post a 1.25 points per possession performance in a half court game. It's just not going to happen.
So to recap, unless you have anything else, and if you do, feel free after I state this, Houston, ATS, or maybe money line if you like that for both of us.
Yeah.
Clayton under points, over assists, and Uzan over points. Biggest takes for bets for this game.
You nailed it. That's where my head's at. And like you, I haven't locked anything in yet, but that is where I'm really starting to sway towards.
And remember to follow Matthew Winick on X to get his bets all in real time at Matthew Winick on X. Just one N in that spelling. Looking ahead to next year, it's very, very early. However, I had a bet in mind, and then I saw before the game started yesterday, DraftKings had a market up. So does FanDuel, but I actually like DraftKings odds a little more for this team I'm targeting in particular. I'm going to let you go first. First off, Duke, the favorite, 10-1. The Boozer brothers coming into town. Carlos's twin sons, I think, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that confirmation. Houston, 12-1. UConn, 14-1. BYU, 16-1. St. John's, 18-1. Purdue, also that same number, are the favorites. Arkansas, Kentucky, and Kansas, all 20-1 as well. Any number stick out to you?
I hate because we're so early in the portal that there's still so much to happen, but
small bet if you were to make it, or it doesn't have to be a bet.
The clear winner of the portal, and therefore probably the best odds on in terms of value, in my opinion, is 22-1 Louisville, because my goodness, have they dominated the portal. They have filled everything that they lost, and they're getting back their two best big men who barely played this season in Ali Khalifa and Kashawn Pryor. Remember, Khalifa was the starting center on a BYU team that was top 15 in the country in most analytics sites last year. They offensively should be a top 5 team in the country. Defense might still be a question. I think they could still use sort of a steadying point guard that Chucky Hepburn was this year that they might not quite have in the guys that they had in the portal, Adrian Woolley, Liam McNeely, and Ryan Conwell, who I think are all fantastic, including Conwell, who on perhaps a slightly better team, no offense to Xavier, I know that was your a team that you had a lot of faith in, on an even better team might show out even better. They have a ton of talent, and who doesn't love Pat Kelsey, who took a team with basically 6.5 scholarship players to the NCAA tournament in a game where they kind of underdelivered, but they still made it to an 8-9 game. At 22-1, I like that. Will I like it in 2 months? Maybe not, but we're talking about this the day before the national championship game.
Well, I will say this, and it was no slight towards FanDuel. FanDuel has worse odds, maybe because the number is a little bit sharper, and Louisville is 14-1 at FanDuel, 22-1 at DraftKings.
Oh, okay. That's something.
Somebody so maybe you do throw a small bet down on Louisville if you like them.
Maybe. I mean, if Louisville adds a point guard and soon, they're probably not. You're not getting 22-1 again before the season starts. Realistically,
I love Ryan Conwell, so therefore I automatically love that bet.
There you go.
As you mentioned, R.I.P. to my Xavier Musketeers. However, they did win and cover against Texas. Horns down, and then Sean Miller bolts to Austin. So just funny coincidence there. He used Xavier once again as a stopping ground. But the bet I like, UCLA 45-1, like Louisville 30-1 at FanDuel, 45-1 at DraftKings. The wild card here is Xavier Booker. How does he develop? But you're not betting UCLA 15-1 with the potential for Booker to flame out. You're betting a 45-1 number where the potential, or maybe not a FanDuel, but at DraftKings with this number, where I expect it to close 30-1-ish at the beginning of the season. Quite honestly, you're betting on his potential at that number. Not just Booker, but his 5-out floor spacing, maybe shot blocking development in mind. The other part of this quote-unquote handicap for me, yeah, you lose Mara, who has a very high ceiling. I don't think he's committed anywhere yet. But Booker 5-out, if he does indeed develop under Mick Cronin, and not to use this as a crutch, but Cronin, by the way, did develop Johnny Juzang, who was another, honestly, construction project when he transferred over from Kentucky. So Cronin does have a history of getting the best of big men, at least recent history, and Juzang is a pretty solid NBA player. Granted, I don't follow the NBA that closely, but he did hit some props for me last year, so I will take that into account with his pro development. Donovan Dent is not a high-volume three-point shooter, but going back to the Florida handicap against Auburn and Florida-Houston, Florida has guards that can create off the dribble. Donovan Dent is one of the best shot creators off the dribble. With that in mind, you kind of have to play 5-out, so no Mara at the 5. And even if Bilodeau is posting up from time to time, and he's a great 3-level scorer for that matter. He could stretch the floor too. That's going to create more of an opening on a possession-by-possession basis for Dent to attack the rim. So, yeah, you lose a high-ceiling big in Mara, but I think Dent's ceiling in a 5-out offense is much higher if Booker develops. It's big if, but if he does, than if you are kind of clogged in the lane with Bilodeau from time to time and Mara. So, all those factors, along with the notion that UCLA probably a top 20, top 15, maybe a top 10 adjusted defensive efficiency next year. I always trust Mick Cronin, the Eggman, in that regard. So I like Houston, or not Houston, I like Houston tomorrow, but I like UCLA at 45-1. I sided with your Louisville bet. Are you going to back me at least ceiling-wise on UCLA?
I will. First of all, I think Donovan Dent and Mick Cronin are a fantastic marriage of point guard and coach. It's really a match made in heaven, and UCLA dropping the bag to get him was a fantastic decision by that program. They added Jamar Brown from Kansas City, who's someone that not a lot of people know about, but he's an excellent shooter, very good rebounder for his size, and also a Cronin guy. Is Booker a Cronin guy? No. Does that make a lot of sense? Probably not. But when you talk about Sky Clark, who was probably their best guard last year, being the only one that's returning, and him being a 40% shooter off the ball next to Dent, Eric Daly was probably their best overall player, and he's back. Trent Perry, the freshman, a lot of potential. They're a piece away, and I think they know that. I'd say probably a wing away. Like Kobe Johnson was probably, if Kobe Johnson had more eligibility, then maybe we're at the same level there. And look, UCLA has like four open scholarship spots. I don't know how much money they have now after Dent, but
they have a lot of money.
If they have more money, then like, if you're banking on another star transfer, then I love it. And this is kind of the cool thing about betting futures in college basketball this particular year, is especially if the House, not to get like legal, but if the House settlement goes through on tomorrow now, and the amount of money that's now at the disposal of some of these programs and the players that are still available, if you think that UCLA's budget has enough money for one more superstar fish, then you're kind of getting out in front of things. And the ability to make these future bets, getting out in front of sort of a real free agency, is super unique. And UCLA will skyrocket if they add someone big on the wing, and then I'm really on board with especially the price that you're getting. So if you can project that roster out, see another piece of that puzzle, then I think everything you said makes sense. And like I said, Dent and Cronin is a great nucleus, great place to start.
Even if it's not a star and it's just a veteran wing that could help space the floor a little more, I'm fine with that too. I still like the number enough. But I thought you were actually going to say, when you brought up Sky Clark, and you're right, shooting close to or right around 40%. But the biggest thing for Clark, to me, going into last year, or still this season, even though UCLA season is over and done with, he wasn't a Cronin guy.
Yeah.
Coming from Illinois, coming from Louisville and Kenny Payne, I didn't expect him to develop into the defender he did. I think close to a 3% steal rate.
Yep.
He developed into not only his a pretty reliable floor spacer, but a really reliable defender. So maybe you could argue, anyone could argue, I could argue that it's not going to happen with Booker. But what I mentioned with Juzang, and you have a more recent transfer in Clark that wasn't a Cronin guy coming into the program and is now a reliable two-way shooting guard. And I think UCLA going into next year, I project them, early projections, as the Big Ten favorite. So Big Ten hasn't won a national title since 2000. I have that going against me, but we can handicap all these title odds all day long.
They're barely in the Big Ten. You're good.
Exactly. Thank you. Still in my version of the Pac-12.
Yeah.
But needless to say, I am bullish on UCLA for next season at 45-1. Matt, any last words before we get out of here on if you want to throw out another take for next year's national title odds, or anything for Houston, Florida, or just betting college basketball in general?
If you're going to be betting college basketball next year, then your work starts last week, because the roster movement, we just talked about two teams that are already going to be very transfer heavy. It's going to be 90% of programs. If you can keep track of where guys are going and you can kind of formulate these opinions now and over the summer, you're going to be so much better off in November where the most value is to be had. At least that's what it's been in the transfer portal era.
He is Matthew Winick. You can follow him on X at Matthew Winick. Big thank you, big thank you to Matt for joining us throughout the NCAA tournament. Also, huge shout out to our producers, Dan Felipe and Jack Roberts, all season long, NFL and college basketball for me. Really appreciate all the hard work and dedication they've put in to make this podcast what it is. Remember to head over to play.thelines.com to enter in for another chance, free contest to win $100. You may as well do it. Thelines.com for my college basketball betting guides. I'll have a piece on Houston and Florida and next year's championship odds, along with entering our free Discord channel for all of our staff bets. Remember to bet safely as well and wisely on this national title game. As we always say, it's not on my script, not on my notes. Please don't chase, especially for the final college basketball game of the season. It's not worth it. Matt and I, or I'm assuming, Matt, you get a ton of DMs yearly, daily, saying, why'd you bet this? You're a bleep. I got a DM on Instagram saying, why didn't you bleep hedge? You know, all that good stuff. Either way, please bet responsibly. It happens. I get it. And I understand that the rude comments are going to come left and right to every person with a following in any sport. But we at least want to recommend to our viewers and listeners to always bet responsibly. So for Matt and for myself, Eli Hershkovich, remember to follow Matt on X at Matthew Winick. I'm at Eli Hershkovich. Thank you so much for tuning in to Beat the Closing Number this college basketball season. So long, everybody, and good luck with your national title bets.